Hey everyone, welcome to today's CREST webinar. The title for today is Getting Off to a Good Start, the Importance of Client Onboarding. I'm Bill Giannone, co-founder with Dick Wagner of the CREST Network, and I welcome you to today's webinar. Today we're going to talk about, as the title says, the importance of getting off to a good start. And I'm going to talk about something that a lot of companies do not spend a lot of time worrying about or thinking about, but I'm going to explain to you how and why this is probably one of the most important things your company can do to make sure that you are setting yourself up for success. As we talk about all the time, every project does have a starting point. Obviously, that starting point is when your company receives the phone call to head out to a loss. Just like in any race, the start determines how the rest of the project will go. Are you ready for the race? That's a real question. I mean, this isn't just a euphemism or a joke. And you're like, oh, yeah, we're ready. We always do a great job. Well, I'm being really serious here when I'm talking about preparation for a race. You know, a race is won and lost in the starting blocks many, many, many times. It's very difficult for a runner or a horse or anybody who's involved in a race to get off to a poor start and make that up. They'd have to be far superior to do that. Well, in our game or in our race, the same exact thing exists. You can't just automatically turn around and start doing good work at production or start trying to do good work after everything's done and now you're going to invoice. You've got to start right away, and that very first person is so important. To me, it is a black and white issue. It's all about building your foundation, and that's what you need to focus on. You need to concentrate on building your foundation for success. How do we do that? Well, first, we're going to talk about a couple of mindsets. Here's a couple of quotes here. You can't build a great building on a weak foundation. So obviously, we know the foundation needs to be strong. If we want to go tall, if we want to go wide, and if we want to go heavy, we need to make sure we have a very, very strong foundation. So what do I mean by tall or wide or heavy? Well, tall might be the extent of the project. Wide might be the size of the project. Or heavy might be the expense of the project. If you're a company that always does a lot of demolition and you're a full service company, then you have special needs. If you're a company that bills a very aggressive invoice for your product, then you have very special needs. I'm here to tell you that at the very start, how you get right out of the gate is going to help determine how well you can execute all those other parts of your business plan. Finally, without a solid foundation, you'll have trouble creating anything of value. This again goes back to the type of business you are and how you want to tell people what your business is. If you are a company that goes in and invoices thousands and thousands of dollars for your product, that's all well and good. You need to understand at the very start of a project, when you're called out, the client who has probably never had a water loss in their lives, the client has no idea what the value of your service is. We don't price ourselves the way plumbers and electricians do. Now, you might question that because you might think plumbers and electricians make a ton of money. They do, but their overall service that they provide is not a hugely expensive service to the client. Think about a hot water heater. If a hot water heater bursts, the heater itself might be $1,000 or $1,500. That's expensive. But the time it takes the plumber to replace that, he's probably only going to charge a few $100s for that service because he might charge $150 or $200 an hour, but he's only going to be there a couple hours. Well, we might not think that we charge a lot because Xactimate might say, well, we're only charging $60 an hour for a technician. But remember, by the time you're said and done, everything in that Xactimate invoice if you use Xactimate, is going to add up to $6, $7, $8,000, depending on how you invoice. When the client sees that and sees that you were only in the house for quote unquote a few hours, they're going to assume your bill is going to be in the hundreds, not in the thousands. So creating anything of value means you have to set a solid foundation. That's part of what we're going to discuss in here. So the question always arises, how can we build our foundation for success? Well, I'm here to tell you that there is a process that's everybody uses, and we don't really refer to it as this. But when we go out and we respond to that phone call, we're not out there trying to sell the loss. We're trying to onboard a client. Selling the loss is one step. Onboarding the client is going to be more than a dozen steps. So we have to think differently. We're not out there selling the job. We're out there onboarding a client. The term onboarding is kind of like a new age business term, but it does really mean a lot more than, just some catchy phrase. The term onboarding, as it relates to anything we do in our business, whether it's with our clients or with our staff, the term onboarding really refers to a process, several step process. And I think we need to start thinking about that. When we bring somebody on, a new employee, it's not just put them in the office, let them fill out paperwork, and then send them out to do their job. We need to explain to them exactly how the job is expected to be done. We need to give them training. We need to give them education. We need to open their eyes. We need to communicate with them, and we need to educate them. The same exact thing happens with client onboarding. We need to bring that client on, not just sign a contract with them, but we need to make them understand exactly what we're going to do. That's truly the only way to be successful. And again, speaking frankly, from a business standpoint, it's the only way that we're going to be able to get the money that we want to get out of this project. So client onboarding, those first moments we spend with our customers will determine our ultimate success at the end. Let's think about it. A normal water job might take 4 or 5 days from the very first moment we get out there to when we take the equipment out, we get a certificate of completion signed. Then we have to create an invoice, submit that. We might have to go back and forth with their insurance adjuster, any representatives they have. We might have to talk to them about payment terms. But let's just say in a normal job that goes through insurance, if we are a company that assists the client in that communication, we might be out there for another couple of weeks. So it might be 3, 4 weeks from the very, very first visit to when we have the money in our hand. So those first few moments, that first couple of hours that we're spending with them is going to have an effect on everything over the next 3, 4 weeks. So let's talk about responsibility. The responsibility of our first person on the scene, whether it's a salesman, project manager, or crew chief, it is to lay the foundation for success. Their responsibility is that and that alone. So what kind of company do you have? Who is your first person on the scene? I put them in reverse order. The first person on the scene for most companies is a crew chief. They usually send the crew out because in smaller companies, that person's responsible for getting the contract signed, looking at what needs to be done, and doing it. Nothing wrong with that. Every company starts this way. Hell, it might even be you as the owner of the company. If your company's real small, you might be the one out there doing that. If that's the case, it's not a problem. Then that's the person who has to be responsible for laying this groundwork and this foundation. Maybe you have a project manager who goes out and oversees and supervises the project. So they go out and they're the one who's responsible for doing all the legwork up front. And then once they get the contract signed, they then call out a crew to do the work. That's fine. Everything we're going to talk about refers to them as well. Finally, if you're a much larger company, you might use what we call a salesman approach. We call them first responders in some of our CREST network clients. The first person out there, but their sole job is to sell, and they don't have much to do with production after that. Right? So you can see crew chief would do everything. Project manager would kind of be a supervisor to everything. And then a salesman would literally just be responsible for the first part of the job, which is signing up the job. But I'm telling you, the salesman has the same steps to do. And those steps are part of what we call a critical path. These are the steps that take place from step 1 to step 100. And those are the things that happen on every project. If you are a process-driven company, and I hope after listening to me for the last several years, you're starting to understand the importance of a good process. If you're a process-driven company, this is what we call a project manager critical path model or method. The normal steps would be steps A, B, C, D, and E. You'll see in the center, they're optimally shown to be the green steps. Those are the go steps. But every once in a while, you're going to have things that are going to happen that are going to take your critical path and take them in another direction. Well, I'm telling you, everything that's done at the start is going to help this part of the process. By doing everything right at the start, you're not just following the normal A through E process. You're allowing for F, G, and or H to be part of your process as well. And that's what we need to do. And that's why it's important to lay these out. So what are the responsibilities of your first responder? And again, whoever shows up first is your first responder. I like that term because it leads clients to believe something good about that person showing up. We always tell our clients when we onboard them on the phone, they call in and they're panicky about a loss. Our phone people, our customer care coordinators or our customer service managers, tell them we're going to have our first responder come out right away. I'm not playing on people's emotions, but I am using the reality that ever since 9/11, we use the term first responders a lot more to talk about police officers and medical personnel and police officers, people who are the first person on the scene of something bad. Well, these people have something bad going on in their home. We are the first responders, and we want to make sure that they understand we're there for them. We want to make sure that they get the idea that the first person out there is there to help them. So they're going to have a warm and fuzzy feeling about it. So what are the responsibilities of your first responders? Well, like I said, there's more than a dozen. Let's get right to them. Obviously, the first responsibility is get there quickly. We are a 24/7 emergency services industry. If somebody has a flood in their house, they're panicked. We can't tell them, well, we'll get out there a week from Tuesday and take a look at it. We have to get out there quickly. Most companies advertise or use as a model a 60-minute response. I have no problem with that as long as you can get there in 60 minutes. In some areas of the country, Los Angeles, New York, even Atlanta, traffic is such that you might take more than an hour to go 10 miles. So be realistic about your response time. Quickly just means leave as soon as you get the call. Don't sit around. Don't schedule the loss response. Get there quickly. That is the first responder's first responsibility. Get there quickly. Then once you get there, your job is to put the client at ease. Now, there's a couple ways to do this. One of the most terrible ways you can do this is by telling the customer, this is no big deal. I know that it's semantics, and I'm a big person when it regards semantics, but you don't want to tell the client this is no big deal. If you say the words, it's no big deal, you just took your value from thousands to hundreds. Most times people say it because innocently they want to try to put the client at ease by telling them, we got this, we do this all the time. I'm okay with saying we do this all the time, but don't say the words, this is no big deal. Instead, think about how this sounds. I'm really glad you called us. We see this all the time. And yes, this is a very big deal. I'm really glad you called us. We'll be able to take care of this for you. I just put the client at ease by saying, we'll be able to take care of this for you. And we see this all the time. But I also said, this is a big deal. I want the client to know that it's not something they could have done, because if it's something they could have done, it's a handyman special. It's hundreds of dollars. This is a big deal means, no, we're professionals. We'll be able to take care of this for you, but this is going to cost you. So I just helped you 3 weeks down the road when the client gets the check and doesn't want to pay you because they think you're overcharging them. This is what I'm talking about, how important these first few hours with the first responder are. After you sat and talked to the client, you go assess the damage. It's not number 2, it's number 3. Remember, you don't want to walk in the house and have the client drag you down to the basement or to wherever the water loss is occurring to look at the water loss. You have to resist that temptation. You have to be able to sit with the client and talk about them, introduce yourself, put them at ease that they hired the right company before you start assessing. That's a really important step. Obviously, after we've done that and after we've put them at ease and we're now comfortable with them, now we're going to say, why don't you show me what you found? Why don't you show me where the loss is? Okay. Now you're going to go and you're going to assess that damage. You're going to take a look, obviously, at everything, and you're going to be as professional as you can in assessing that damage. Once you've assessed the damage, you're going to sit and you're going to develop a plan of action. This is not something that's going to take 5 seconds. I want you to really, really study the loss site. I want you to study where the damage is coming from, what it's affecting, and be very, very thorough. If it's a kitchen and there's a pipe break under the sink and it's going all throughout the kitchen, check all the other rooms out. Do a very thorough analysis using moisture meters, using infrared cameras. Try to find out where the water is going. If it's going downstairs, remember, water doesn't go in a straight line. Water will spread out between floors, and it might not be affecting the room next door on the second floor. If it's a bathroom or something, it might not be in the bedroom yet on the second floor, but when it gets into that cavity between the floors, it's going to spread, and it might be 3-4 rooms on the bottom floor, even though it's only 1 room on the top floor. Make sure you do a very, very detailed plan of action for how you're going to assess that damage and then figure out how you're going to address doing that. Once you've done that, your next step is to communicate those findings and your plan of action with the client. It's really important that they know what you're going to do before they sign anything. This is a very important step. You're developing trust. You've already developed a little bit of trust by walking in there and putting them at ease. Hopefully, when you're doing your assessing of damage and you're developing your plan, you're sharing some of that information with your client, not necessarily the way that I'm showing here on the photo, where you're standing there with them. This is a secondary step. This happens at the end of your assessment and development. But while you're assessing, walk them out with your infrared cameras. Show them, hey, see this? This doesn't necessarily mean there's water there, but this difference in color means there's a difference in temperature. A lot of times cooler temperatures are associated with water. So we're just going to have to inspect and try to figure out if that is water or not. Show them those cameras. Show them on the moisture meter where it reads 99. Show them and explain to them what that means. Oh, there's definitely a lot of water here. Look what this is. Educating them in that way and what you're using, the tools you're using, is a great sales technique. That's really important. I'm not saying you're creating a dog and pony show. You're not doing anything unethical or illegal. You're just using all the tools at your disposal to help you sell that job. And part of that is showing them how you assess damage, showing them how you develop your plan. Then you communicate all of that with them. You want to be as detailed as possible, because the more detailed you are, the more expensive, and the more detailed your service is, the more expensive your invoice will be. Again, you're laying the foundation for success. This is what I mean. Is it really important to dig down 8 feet if you're going to build a 2-story house? Who knows? It is if you're in a certain part of the country where you have to worry about frost lines and you have to worry about your foundation getting heaved out of the ground if the ground freezes underneath it. So taking the time to dig a deep hole and laying the groundwork and laying the concrete and putting in the footers, that's all important before you put up that first wall. We'd all love to put up a first wall without any foundation, but the house is going to crumble. It's going to be very difficult to live in afterwards. Well, that's what we're doing here. We're laying the foundation for our successful plan. Number 6, document everything. If you're walking around and you're assessing your damage, and then if you're developing your plan, it all has to be documented. You need photos. You need photos of the damage. You need photos of the water on the ground. You need photos of the leaking pipe. You need photos of all the damaged inventory. You need photos of wet carpet. You need photos of your moisture meters taking the readings. It's much easier to convince somebody that it was 99 if you can show them it was 99. Just writing it on a log is not good. But part of documenting it is creating a moisture log as well. That's important. So document everything. Most first responders that we train at the CREST Network walk around and also do a video documentation and evidence. We have our first responders using video cameras. We have them using the 3D imagery to create their scopes and sketches. They'll use products like Matterport or DocuSketch. I know some things like Encircle also offer it. Xactimate also offers a tool where you can do that. It's very important. The more documentation you have of the before and the during, when it comes time to get paid, that before and during documentation is going to help you justify what you're billing for. So I can't overestimate enough or stress enough the importance of documentation. This is very important. Then after all of that is done, get your paperwork signed, get your work authorization signed, get your direction of payment signed. If you don't know what that is, direction of payment is a form that allows your insurance company to write the check out to you. It allows the policyholder, your client, to let the insurance company write a check out directly to you for the services. That's a really important part, because if it gets mailed to the homeowner, by the time the homeowner cashes it and then sends you the payment, it could be a week or later. And the reality also is, if the homeowner has the money in their hands, it allows them the opportunity to start haggling with you about what your bill is. We want to take that out of their hands. If the insurance company agrees with what you billed and they send you the payment, that should be enough. There's no insurance fraud. There's no haggling. You're going to get your money. So get that direction of payment signed with your work authorization. If you are a type of company that creates a quote of work, then that's an official contract. Put the scope of work that you're going to do, put the price on there, and get that signed. That's a legal binding contract as well. So make sure you get all of that filled out. That's your paperwork that you need to get signed. If there's any other paperwork, if there's any other authorizations you want signed, if there's any authorities you need, if somebody's representing the owner and you need to have a power of attorney, make sure you have that as paperwork as well. Once that's done and you've developed your plan of action, go and sketch the loss site. I usually say to sketch it after the paperwork is signed, because I don't want you to go and do all this work and effort if the homeowner is not going to go forward with you. So now the paperwork's signed. If you're a project manager or if you're a first responder, now you're waiting for the crew to show up. This is a good time to go sketch that loss site. We need to have a really accurate sketch. I said before, some people use Matterport, some people use DocuSketch. Those tools can be used to sketch the loss. Good old-fashioned paper, just like we see here on the picture. Graph paper is still a preferred method by most restoration companies who aren't as technologically savvy or large. Go and just sketch that loss. We need very, very accurate measurements, because if you're removing all the carpet in a room, we need to know how many square feet that is, not just for the removal, but for the putback as well. Most line items in Xactimate are what we call unit priced line items. They need linear footage, square footage, cubic footage in order to calculate the needs. All of your equipment needs are based on square and cubic footage. So we need good measurements of those rooms. So sketch out that loss site. Now, if you're a repair company as well, if you do full service work, your sketch should include some areas of the house that aren't affected as well. Think about it this way. If you have continuous flooring, if you have hardwood floors and you're going to be removing the hardwood floors in the kitchen, but they run continuously in an open concept into the living room and the dining room, you have to sketch those rooms out as well. Because when you go to put that flooring back in the kitchen, you're not going to necessarily remove all the hardwood flooring in the other rooms, but you might have to sand and stain and finish them so that they do have a consistency throughout the rooms. Well, guess what? For your repair part of your scope, it's going to be important to know what the square footage of those rooms is as well, so that you could write up a repair estimate. Why not do it at the start? Be very accurate at the start. So get that done. You can see, guys, as I'm talking here, I'm not talking about a 15-minute process. I'm talking about a process that in many cases is going to take 2 to 3 hours That's the foundation part, right? Building a foundation, digging it out, and then putting it in a house takes months sometimes. It takes time. Set that determination and assessment and all this work, set that early. Determine the cat and class of loss at inspection time. Again, this should be done during your assessment, during steps 3 and 4, but I'm throwing it in here again just as a reminder to your first responder. It's really important to set the cat and class of loss at inspection time. The IRC or CS 500 says that we need to do this. We need to have the first person on site determine the cat and class of loss at inspection time. This does not mean that by the time we get to do the work, there might not be a change in the cat and class of loss, because some things outside of our control may have affected this. Maybe the homeowner saying, well, I want you to do this, but I'm leaving town for 2 days and I just need for you to stabilize if you can, and then I'm going to let you not do the work for 3 days. We don't know. We're in the holiday season right now. Sometimes people might say, I'm leaving from town in 4 hours. I can't have you in my house. We have to always do what's best for the client, and we have to work around the client's wishes, but that doesn't mean that if we go back in a week, that Cat 1 or Cat 2 loss may have degraded to a Cat 2 or Cat 3 loss. That's okay. But at the time of our initial inspection, this is what we found. Now, this picture shows clean water, gray water, black water. That's kind of an old determination. We understand it's Cat 1, 2, and 3 today. I just want you to understand this is a very important aspect of what we do. Very important as well, we need to document and determine the source of the loss. Guys, here's a reality. In 2023, something that changed very drastically was there was a huge uptake from some of the major carriers in denials of claims based on perceived source of loss. Carriers were trying to find any reason to deny a claim. And one of the main things that they struck on was, well, the source of loss wasn't determined to be a covered source. It's supposed to be the other way around. It's supposed to be, well, you're covered unless we can prove that the cause of loss is not covered. But they were using this and they were trying to turn it on its head, telling clients, well, guess what? You're not covered unless you can prove it. Well, many times by the time the adjuster gets there, if they get there at all, we've already demoed out any obvious source of loss. If we don't document that properly, we don't have proof that it was the water heater or that it was a pipe behind a wall or that was a valve. We don't have that proof. Guess what? It's not going to be covered. We need to make sure we do that. Part of this also is many, many times we're getting referred the loss from a plumber. The plumber might say, listen, I got called by the homeowner. The homeowner had a broken pipe. I went out and I fixed the pipe, but I need you to come out here and fix the damage that it caused. Well, that presents a problem for us because many times, again, the plumber might have removed that source of loss. We need to educate our plumbers if they're referring work to us to try to take pictures of that source of loss before they demo it out. We also need what they call a plumber's report. The plumber will produce a report for the work that they did. And they will say, here's what happened, here's what we found, and here's how we fixed it. Now, that plumber's report does become part of our documentation. So many times we'll have to ask the plumber or the homeowner for that plumber's report. It's very important we get that. And it's very important that it states a clear and obvious source of loss. Okay, remember, if the plumber cites a cause of loss that is not covered, then we don't have a covered loss. We need to know that right up front. If it's a sump pump failure, and the homeowner in most cases is going to have a sump pump exclusion. If it's a sump pump failure and the plumber says sump pump failure on his plumber's report, we have to make sure the homeowner understands that they're going to be paying for our services out of pocket. These are just some things that we need to know. But wouldn't I rather know that now rather than 3 weeks from now when the adjuster says, oh, not covered, I'm not paying you. And now the homeowner is stuck with a bill that they didn't know and we didn't explain to them. That's why it's really important to do all of this up front. This communication is so important. This goes into number 11, weigh your response needs. If we're pretty sure that this is going to be covered, because not because we're making a policy determination, but because our experience tells us that most times we see this and it is covered, then we have no problem. We're able to weigh our response needs and we're going to do whatever we need to do. But I gave you a situation of a sump pump failure as to how that might change our response needs. We might have to do something for the client that minimizes their cost. Similarly, if a client's going to be leaving the home, or if the client is going to limit our access or says, hey, this is my situation in this home, I need you to work around this, or there's no way you're going to demo out my kitchen. If there's a way that we could possibly do that without having to demo out their kitchen, we're going to look at that and we're going to weigh those response needs. That's really good for most of the times our first responders to take that action. Now, sometimes if the first responder is strictly a salesman and doesn't have that ability, they're going to wait till a handoff and they're going to assess that with either the first responders project manager or the first responders crew chief. When they do that, we're going to make sure that that's, those professionals are going to make those determinations. But we do want to weigh those response needs. That's a very important part of what happens up front. We can't start in one direction and go in another direction. That's not going to work in most cases. Very important. Number 12, take asbestos samples if demo is required. Remember, this is now part of the ISCRC standard. This has always been part of really good methodology. It's part of OSHA and most state requirements that if you're going to do any kind of demolition to a home, you have to take asbestos samples. Now, people have been using the rule of thumb 1981 or before. This is wrong, guys. The standard and the OSHA qualifications do not specify a date. The date 1981 has always been used as a catch-all because in 1981, OSHA put out their first warning about asbestos. And there's a false belief that that's when building materials stopped having asbestos in them. Well, the reality is, up till today, you could still find asbestos in some building materials. There are homes that have been built in the last 3-4 years that the mud that's used for drywall taping has asbestos in it. And it has it in the mud to a level that you must be testing, because if it's in there, you cannot just demo it out. Now, I know for some of you that don't do asbestos in-house, or that you're looking at that job and say, well, if it does come back positive, it means I'm not going to be able to do my job because I'm going to have to give it to an asbestos company. Listen, we're either going to operate ethically or we're not. And you have to do what's best for your clients. You also have to do what's best for your own workers. If your workers are doing this and they're constantly being exposed to asbestos when they're demoing drywall, or when they're demoing floors out, and you are not providing them with accurate information, or worse, you're telling them just go demo it out and you're not letting them know about these hazards, you're putting their health at risk. You can't be doing that, guys. So it's very, very important that if you're doing any kind of demos, you do asbestos sampling. In many states, your first responders can get a license to be able to pull asbestos samples. You don't need to be fully asbestos certified just to pull samples. Okay, there are methods to do that, and you can do that, but this is really important. It's important to do that up front. If you happen to be a full service company that does do asbestos work and do asbestos abatement, this is a great way for you to handle this up front, because it's going to go into part of handling your next steps. You want to address that right now. Okay, we're past a dozen. We're up to step number 13. Fill out your scope sheets, your drawing plan, your equipment calculation sheets now. You need to have these things. I mean, I facetiously have a photo up here of waterlogged, old, crusty pieces of paper, but it's important because by the end of the project, this is what your paperwork's going to look like from the start. Scope sheets need to be filled out on site. They need to be done at the very beginning. Your scope of work needs to be addressed at the start. Your drying plan, the ISCRC says every job has to have a drying plan. Where are you going to put equipment? How much equipment are you going to put on? How long do you plan on having them there? You have to lay that out. That's called a drying plan. to make a sketch of your room and then put little symbols for your where your air movers are going to go, where your DU is going to go, where your scrubbers are going to go. That's a drawing plan. Your equipment calculation sheets. This is a very, very mistaken thing in our industry. Everybody thinks you're just allowed to put whatever equipment you want. No, you can't. There are specific calculations that are in the IRCS 500 and the S520 that guide you to tell you how much equipment you're allowed to place. Now, yes, it's the professional's responsibility, but it's also your responsibility as the professional to determine that count. What are we using? Well, guess what? In the S500, they lay it out. There's a formulation that you could use. Most of the clients that I work with use what we call a detailed equipment calculation. It's a spreadsheet that they develop that allows them to take into account things like the HVAC within the house, the type of house. Is it an open concept house or is it a house with a lot of smaller rooms? What is the age of the house and what kind of envelope does the house have? Does the house feel like it's a very tight house, or does it feel like, oh, the wind's just whipping through those windows on a cold day? Those things determine whether or not we could use more or less equipment. What's the size and the height of the house? What's the cubic footage? All those things go into calculating how much air movement we need, how much air scrubber calculation we could put on, and how much dehumidification we need. It's the difference between using larges and extra larges. It's the difference between using 6 air movers and 8 air movers. Every time that we are going to use those calculations, it's going to benefit us because we're going to be exact. Have you ever run into an adjuster who said to you, you didn't put enough air movement on, I'm giving you more money? No, they always want to give you less. So doing this work up front is going to guarantee that you can justify whatever equipment you put on. We happen to train our clients to put on a lot of equipment because we think a lot of equipment means the exact amount that the job calls for. That's a lot. Not a lot is whatever the insurance company usually pays me for, because I'm tired of fighting with them. Guess what? Every single time you do that, you're leaving money on the table. That's a mistake. Don't do that. Next step, create a timeline for the execution of your work. You, by now, if you've done all of that work, you should be able to know how long the demo is going to take, the extraction, the cleaning, and then finally, you should have a fairly good idea once the equipment goes on, through your experience. Is it 3 days? Is it 4 days? Is it 5 days? It should never be 1 or 2 days, guys. If we're doing our work properly and if we're taking proper measurements, buildings just don't dry that quickly unless we're in a building with metal studs and metal floors and we're taking all the wet materials out. Let's just be realistic, but let's make sure we create a timeline for the execution of work. Once again, we're communicating that to the homeowners. We're communicating that on paperwork as well. Step 15, our final step. We're handing off the project to the crew and or the project manager if needed. If you happen to be the project manager or the crew, then there's no handoff. But if you are just a salesman or a first responder, then you need to hand that off to the crew. It's really important, guys, that you can't leave the house and have that homeowner sitting there by themselves and then the crew come and not be introduced. It's really important to do that handoff. When the crew shows up, you shake Johnny's hand, you put your arm around him, you say, oh, Mrs. Smith, you're really lucky. Johnny's our best crew chief. Now, obviously, if Jimmy showed up instead of Johnny, Jimmy would be your best crew chief, but you're letting them know you trust this guy. You've built that trust. You've built that credibility. You've built that reliability factor with your client. It's important that you physically hand that off. Like on a relay race, the handing off of the baton, you're not allowed in a relay race to toss the baton to your next person. You have to physically hand it to them. That's what we're doing. We're physically handing this project, the baton, off to the crew. That's really important. It might seem like a stupid question, but why do first impressions count so much? Well, they count because the homeowner is in a state of panic. They've never met us before. They've probably, if they're 99.9% of our clients, never heard of us or never seen an ad that we run, because we don't market like that. We're not the type of work where we're going to say, well, I'm going to run an ad on the radio because if you have a water loss in a year, you're going to remember my name. It just doesn't work that way. We're not, top of mind impulse buys. We are kind of, part of my French, but we're oh shit buys. And that's what we run. So first impressions count. How you treat this process is very important. I just laid out a 2 to 3 hour elaborate process. So that elaborate process is the foundation. It's the foundation for good quality work to come. It's the foundation for a big invoice to come, and it's the foundation for money to follow. Why is all of this necessary? Well, again, here's what we're walking into. The homeowners freaked out about this. You and I look at this and it looks like, okay, it's a nice water loss, no big deal. But we're going to turn this into, this is a big deal. We know this is a big deal to you, the homeowner. We also know to do this right, it's a big deal to us, the client, right? Let's look at this photo and let's spend a minute looking at this photo. It might not look like a big deal, but this is a big deal because it's not just the water that we see on the ground. This water was a much higher water flood that has receded. How do I know? Well, there's a couple of puddles in different spots on the floor, the low spots of the floor. Number one, so I know that there was more water than this originally. Number two, I've got a pretty good trained eye for such things, but if you look on the right side of that wall, and you can see that there's a water line about an inch and a half up on the brown part of the wall above the trim. There's a discoloration and there looks like a staining. So we know that the water got above the trim line. So that means water has compromised not just the baseboard, but it's also gotten in behind whatever sill plate is there. It has saturated the sill plate, the bottom part of your wall inside behind the drywall. So I know I've got to take off that baseboard. I've got to cut the drywall. I've got to open that entire cavity up, at least on the one side. I have to see if the drywall has been compromised on the other side of the wall, because we know the water was at least that high. And if it was that high throughout, now I've got issues with all the doors that are leading out to the backyard. Okay, that's a simple 1 minute explanation of how I know this is a severe loss. So I need to start communicating that, right? When your first responder takes the time and effort to do all of the things, those 15 tasks I explained before, they will set your company up for the best chance at a successful and profitable project. Remember, the steps they're doing involve not just production, but also invoicing and collections. Their efforts in those first few hours will have a positive effect on the production of the work, the communication of that work, the invoicing and collections process, and your overall customer satisfaction. Remember, customer satisfaction is really important because customer satisfaction puts good ratings out there, which allows somebody who's looking you up to say yes instead of no. All of those steps are really important. So now your first responder, who is sales, is affecting production, he's affecting finance, and he's also affecting marketing. That's a really important thing when you're starting to think about the steps in your process and how those process steps really reflect on each other. Again, I'm going to reiterate it one more time. Build a strong foundation. I think we understand where I'm getting at. I want to thank you so much for taking time with us this morning. My name is Bill Giannone. If you have a question about this or any of our webinars or any of our podcasts for that matter, please reach out to us, bill@thecrestnetwork.com or dick@thecrestnetwork.com. Our website is www.thecrestnetwork.com, all one word. And we're on Spotify under CRESTcasts. We have over 200 and some odd podcasts on there. We've reached over 1,000 downloads, and we're very proud of that. On behalf of Dick Widener, I'm Bill Giannone. I wish you all a happy holidays, and I wish you all a very Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. And I want to thank you all for being part of this CREST webinar today. Bye-bye.